The next speaker is the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. He was first elected in 2003 as the Senator for the Northern Territory and has been a Minister since 2013. He is a friend to many Yolngu people and he is a friend to the Yothu Yindi Foundation. Please welcome Nigel Scullion.
Thank you. More than 5 decades ago, on these lands, Yolngu people carefully inscribed and designed 2 petitions on bark. They were from the voices that had not been allowed to resonate loudly enough in the halls of Parliament House in Canberra, and they were partly in Yulmatha, a language that I venture to say probably had not been heard there before. Imagine for a moment what it must have been like for Mr Yunupingu, Mr Wangamara and Mr Marika as they considered the wording and the design of the petitions, full of hope that someone would recognise their prior claim to land, despairing of all they may lose. Frustrated by the fact that people were not just hearing their message that connection to land is lasting, it's alive and cannot be disrespected. They could only hope that a Minister of the Australian Government would one day stand on land at Gulkula, recognise it as ancestral land and utter words of respect and recognition. Today I honour a tradition that we have established between us, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you on your land. I humbly pay my respects to the Gumach people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to your elders, past and present, who protected and cared for this land for tens of thousands of years and who cared for community. I want to especially acknowledge Galaroi Yunupingu Bapaji, leader of Gumach and my good friend, for the invitation to be here today. I acknowledge your leadership of your people and I thank you for your wise counsel over many years. I look forward to continuing to work with you and Gumach on the years to come. I want to also acknowledge the work of the Yothu Yindi Foundation led by Denise in preparation for this festival. Before I get into my speech, I'd like to acknowledge the absolute horrors that occurred within the Dondale Correctional Facility. I, like everyone who saw the footage this week, was shocked and appalled at the mistreatment of the children at the detention centre. Every child, in fact every person in our justice system, must be treated with humanity and respect at all times. There can never be any excuse for authorities entrusted with the welfare of children held in custody meting out brutality on these same children. We must have zero tolerance for these practices. I'm pleased that the Prime Minister has acted immediately to establish a Royal Commission. This needs to be an open and transparent and forensic inquiry that shines a bright light on what occurred and why the atrocities were concealed for so long. It's important that the failures at the Dondale Youth Detention Centre are identified, as well as the causes of these failures, to provide lessons to all correctional institutions in Australia to ensure that they are never repeated. And we must all take appropriate responsibility for what's occurred, including myself. Now, I'm sorry I wasn't aware of the full circumstances that were exposed this week. Clearly, I must be better informed about such matters, particularly when the vast majority of youths held in detention in the Northern Territory are Indigenous. I commit to better monitoring of the actions of all state and territory governments. I've already written to my counterparts in each government offering my support and seeking their advice about how we may do this. I'm sorry that I accepted advice indicating the Northern Territory Minister was responding to the concerns that were previously raised. And just very quickly, there's been some commentary in the media in recent days from people criticising me for not watching the Four Corners program live, with a suggestion I only did so because the Prime Minister rang me. This is utter nonsense. I had a long-standing engagement of a very important and private matter that I honoured. I watched the program, as many Australians did, with horror and outrage when I returned home. Now to why we're here at Gulkula this weekend. The theme of this festival is "The land is our backbone," and it's a very apt sentiment. It says in the original bark petition, and I quote, "The land in question has been hunting and food gathering land for the Gulkula tribes for time immemorial. The story of thousands of years encapsulated in those 2 bark petitions wasn't enough to stop the bauxite mine, but it led eventually to recognition in white man's law and to the creation of the Land Rights Act, one of the strongest pieces of legislation to protect land of the Aboriginal people probably in the world. We are now navigating a transition from a system geared towards the recognition of rights in land and waters to a system that supports Indigenous landholders to use these rights to develop their own economic and cultural aspirations. The challenge is still before us. We're not there yet. The challenge is one of many of you, including Galleroy, would have considered 40 years ago as part of the formation of the Justice Woodward report. Who are the traditional owners? What roles and responsibility will traditional owners have? How can we translate the recognition of land rights into better outcomes for our first Australians? These questions that now, 40 years on, remain a challenge in front of us. But before I discuss these important issues and how we can wake up land rights once and for all, I want to take this opportunity here at Garma to say it's a privilege to get another opportunity to be Minister for Indigenous Affairs. It's a privilege I don't take lightly, and I intend to hit the ground running. Our first Australians deserve nothing less than a fully committed minister. As I have often said, this portfolio, working with our first Australians across the country, is the only portfolio I want, and I've been delighted to have been afforded that privilege. 2 years ago in a Garma speech, I quoted Jawa Yunupingu, who said in an AB interview, "It's action we want to see from these people, from politicians. Not just talk, but action. After talking, bang. That's what we want to see from politicians." I want to take this opportunity to recount what I've heard in my discussion with our First People, to outline actions for our second term. The work program of my first term was influenced by and constantly evolved because of the discussions I've had in 200 community visits in over 150 communities. Progress and priority in my portfolio should not be judged or determined by bureaucrats or academics in the major centres based primarily in the southeast corner of this country. This is something that we need to hear from people in community, something we need to listen to, whether that community is in Redfern, in Yalata or Gulkula. And I want to reflect on what Galleroy recounted recently as part of his essay in the Monthly. With my family, I have built at Gunyara into a place that we hoped all Yolngu places might be, back when hope powered the homeland movement. Men and women go to work and sweat for their wages. Children go to school. Old people are safer and happier, and we are making our way. It is these priorities I've heard across this country time and time again. They are the priorities held as much by non-Indigenous people as our first Australians. And they were the priorities that we all recognise needed to be acted on after many years, across both sides of politics, where the change that Indigenous Australians should have expected had not been delivered on. Now, this change has not always been popular, and I acknowledge that we haven't always got everything right. Far from it. But things have started to change. Through the funding reforms we've introduced as part of the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, we now know for the first time where Indigenous Affairs funding is going, something I was never able to get an answer on when I was in opposition. We now have a much better understanding of what's working and what's not working. And importantly, around 55% of the funds are now going to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. Despite some of the myths that have been peddled by those with alternative agendas, there's actually been a significant increase in the number of organisations being funded. And speaking of myths, I was just speaking to Marsha Langdon earlier today, and she was asking me, she had some concerns about the Ranger program, and a leak from Crikey had indicated, you know, everybody was going to be terminated in 5 years and the program's over. Well, you know, if it looks gammon, it probably is, and I'm happy to tell you that that is complete nonsense. It is really important that we acknowledge that the number of Indigenous organisations, not only in the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, but across every layer of government, are not enough. They're certainly not high enough. And I'll be pushing to make sure that good, robust organisations are getting the job done, and if they don't have the capacity, we'll be working with organisations to ensure that they have the capacity and they have the funds to be better run by Indigenous people or have a high number of Indigenous people working for them. My commitment to you today is that we will work to better understand what each community wants and needs and support those activities to reach their goals. Increasingly, we'll work with communities to move beyond the old transactional way of doing business. I want relationships that are based on understanding your goals, the future that Aboriginal and Islander people want to build, working to tailor local solutions that are owned by the people that are involved. This is what I've previously spoken about, and I have spoken to the Dilak here in northeast Arnhem Land about respecting the Dilak as the cultural authority of the region and as my principal source of advice for government when it comes to policies and programs. Now, whilst I've locked in this relationship and we have a very clear understanding of our roles and responsibilities in northeast Arnhem Land, we're a long way from that across Australia. So to lock in this relationship in a wider scope will be the challenge for this term, and one that I'm looking forward to taking on. Across the country, we're working with Indigenous communities as well as part of our Empowered Communities initiative by funding the backbone organisations to move this new way of thinking and work to the next level. I acknowledge the work today of many of you here in this important initiative, and particularly like to acknowledge the work of Noel. I was more and much better informed and have a higher level of confidence listening to his explanation around the hook and other issues that I think are very difficult issues. And thank you for that, Noel. Looking ahead, I know that the key to closing the gap lies not just about me investing money or the other governments investing money and rolling out programs. If we want to value add all these programs, we need to ensure that we are working in a partnership with a shared purpose. Now, my responsibility is to redouble my efforts to work with my ministerial colleagues across the Australian government and the states and the territories. I control about 7% of the budget that impact on Indigenous people, 7%. So over the next 3 years, my mantra will be every minister, every department, every government, and my colleagues will be hearing it over and over, not only from me, but I hope from all of you. Getting better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people must be front and centre for every minister, every department, every state. And none of us need to rest until every minister and every department understands that at the front of their thinking, the first thing that they think of is how can I assist the First Peoples? Is this a contract I can give out? If I can't, how do I raise their capacity to ensure that the next time round that can occur? This national effort will build on the solid foundation established over the last 3 years. Now, I came to the job with a very clear agenda: getting children to school, adults to work, and making communities safe. Now, some said, oh, that's a bit simplistic, it's just a 3-line slogan, but focusing on these basics has given us a fundamental framework for future direction. So, for example, by getting kids to school, our commitment to them is not just about getting their foot in the door of the classroom, but the best possible education, to see them attain at the same level and have every opportunity post-school that their white friends have, whether through further training, education or employment. In the same way, we've put in place policies to support Indigenous businesses. Our procurement policy has seen Commonwealth contracts with Indigenous-owned companies increase from around 6 million in basically June of 2015. So it's a bit over our 12-month anniversary, and we've gone from 6 million to 200 million and growing. So why is this so important? Because Indigenous businesses, owned businesses, are 100 times more likely to employ another Indigenous Australian than other mainstream businesses. And the other reason it's very important is because it shows that it can be done. It shows that it can be done. If we simply make a decision that we will buy products and services from Indigenous businesses, and that's across government, it just shows in 1 year the amount that we can actually achieve. And I'll be speaking more tonight to the corporate dinner, but my commitment to you is to continue to grow this. More companies owned by Indigenous people will benefit from government contracts. Other governments need to do this. Other companies need to do this. And anyone that the Commonwealth will be doing business with in the future if they want to keep doing business with in the future, will need to do this. And it's that joint effort from both governments and business is needed to drive delivery of change. That's why during the election campaign we committed to $90 million over 3 years to support more enterprises, more new and emerging businesses, more opportunities for entrepreneurs. And each day, as a result of our programs, about 60 people are starting in a real job. Now we only fund, or we're starting to more fund companies on outcomes. So not just the churn of somebody coming for 2 weeks, the employer getting paid for them to start, not making any effort to ensure that they're culturally competent and being in that churn. We pay people in the main when Indigenous people are employed for 6 months. So you don't get an initiative payment until the period of time that we know somebody needs to be in that workplace to feel comfortable, for the workplace to be more culturally competent and to ensure that they are driven by ensuring that that outcome is the same as ours. And we know once you're there for 6 months, there's a very, very high chance of you remaining in the workforce. So too, our new community development program is starting to build positive change. I know from speaking to leaders in communities that this is the change that they want. They've said very clearly to me, we want our people to be active, to be changed, trained and to contribute to the community and its future to help them into long-term jobs. It's a message we've heard loud and clear, and I'm committed to overcoming the barriers in the halls of Parliament House and other houses of power across the country to deliver what the community wants. A return to many of the positive elements of the old Community Development and Employment Program, especially to return to the direct relationship between local community organisations and job seekers instead of the ever unavailable Centrelink. If our employment programs are to be successful, we know we need to make a real impact through the support we provide to improve education outcomes for our first Australians. At higher education levels, there is virtually no employment gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And it's inspirational to see the rapid increases in the numbers of Indigenous students pursuing higher education. 70% increase in the decade between 2004 and 2014, and that's a geometric rate of progression. Education begins early. Quality early education helps a seamless transition to school. This is why we have the ambitious target of having 95% of all Indigenous 4-year-olds enrolled in early childhood education. And I don't need to say it again, but you know that while I'm your minister, school attendance will always be firmly on the national agenda. I won't tolerate passive racism where entrenched low expectations of Indigenous children relegate them to getting a second-class education, or because of the temporary relationship with the education, no education at all. Changing this starts with making sure kids attend school every day, working with parents and families to make sure this happens, having the best teachers. You can see here in this Urinal region, there's about 130 dedicated school attendance officers are supporting kids and families. Every one of them deserves recognition for their creativity, their tenacity and commitment to improving the lives of children in their communities. We must also make changes to broaden the education system, to recognise Indigenous Australians at the heart of the nation, to make this a key area of studies for all. And perhaps before I just go on and make some particular announcements, I should, I think, go to my motive for this. We have, over time in our history, made some attempts, some very successful, some not so successful, at what we call reconciliation, to reconcile the differences between our First Peoples and those who came after them. Some of these have been great, some not so. I often think about, this is about understanding more about the other person. How do I put myself in someone else's shoes? Well, many of you would be around my age, or some of you around my age, and I'm sure it affected plenty of people much younger than me. But what we were taught at school was this notion that this bloke, Captain Cook, arrived on a beach. They were there with their finery, in their finery, very civilised, you know, wearing multitudes of felt and all sorts of uniforms, and there was the poor savage on the beach. You know, a bit of kangaroo skin, he's got a fire, he's got a stick, no civilisation. We brought civilisation to Australia. I mean, that was the notion I learnt in school. Frankly, I don't think that's changed too much. But doesn't it? My dad used to say, look, a lie is two things. You can pervert the facts, and that's a lie, or you can redact or not say a whole bunch of stuff, and that's equally in that category. And so the painting of our history to our children has done just that. We haven't told the real story, because perhaps I could forgive Captain Cook because he may not have understood what he was seeing and was flitted off in a boat somewhere. But the truth that we know, and we are sitting in the centre of culture and spirituality in this place, the truth is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia enjoyed the most complex civilisation, the most complex civilisation. They had the most challenging, so many nations, hundreds and hundreds of nations. And they had foreign affairs policies that were highly complex. The refreshment of those foreign affairs policies were complex and worked out over tens of thousands of years. Their domestic policies about intermarriage, about rules, about families, about relationships, about how you would resolve those matters were eminently as complex as the Peruvian Empire and the Egyptian Empire, which we learnt lots about at school. And I think one of the most important things is a lot of people talk about country and a lot of people talk about the way that country, in a real sense, is protected. We're all concerned. There wasn't 1 square inch of this country pre-settlement that wasn't managed particularly. It was managed by fire, but it was also managed by a complex series of legislation and regulation. And it was refreshed, and when resources moved between nations, they made sure that on both sides of that nation they had the same approach. So what an interesting history, and yet nobody knows anything about it. And this is so important in terms of reconciliation, because it's very hard for us to understand how Aboriginal people are today until we really understand what we took away. So that I know that our Indigenous culture is at the heart of our nation. It's my strong belief that Aboriginal and Islander culture and history must be explored, explained, learnt about and delighted in our schools. So Indigenous language and history will be at the heart of our curriculum, has to be at the heart of our curriculum if we are to educate future Australians to be truly respectful and value our nation's heritage. I commit today to work with the Minister for Education, Simon Birmingham, state and territory governments and communities and schools to ensure the foundation to Year 10 curriculum is designed to enable all students to engage in reconciliation, in respect and recognition of the world's oldest continuing living cultures. It shouldn't only be those of us fortunate enough to attend events like Garma who have the chance to engage in culture and language. And I look forward to the focus on Indigenous education being rolled out in schools across the country as a matter of priority. As I said earlier, this year's Garma theme, Land is Our Backbone, rings so true to all of us. Over the years, I've seen people connect with their land, their country, their culture. I've heard stories from their dream time. I've had song lines shared with me that are so much a part of the culture and the land that is the backbone of those stories. At Garma last year, Gumatj traditional owners and I signed a memorandum of understanding to negotiate a township lease for Gunyar, held by a community organisation, not by a government statutory office holder. And Gallery has said, I really want the benefits of this, but there's an element of this that actually takes away my control for our land, and we're not doing that. So let's sit down and work on that basis. How is it that we can get the benefits of the lease, but we don't lose the control in a cultural sense, which we are unable to give away? So we sat down and I listened to innovators who came up with a wonderful, innovative solution to the challenge, and great progress has been made to what will be the first township lease to be held by a traditional owner corporation. This new time of township lease will unlock opportunities for its owners, for its community and for this region, and will be an example of traditional owners taking up the opportunities of their land and using it to create the community they want for their kids and future generations. This isn't a standalone example. Government is working with other communities and land councils to support traditional owners with similar aspirations, and I look forward to working with other communities wishing to adopt this particular model in the future. There are just so many good stories to tell from this part of the world that show Gumatj traditional owners leading the way to develop businesses, particularly in remote and very remote Aboriginal land. Not far from where we sit now, I'm not sure if you've gone across there, you'll see the accommodation facilities for Gumatj's Mine Training Centre. Here the Gumatj employees will be receiving on-the-job training in a range of fields. When you go there, every single part of that has been built by Gumatj. Have a look at the bricks, have a look at the timber, have a look at the completely finished furniture. Every single thing was built here by Gumatj people. There are many of their enterprises that focus on sustainable jobs and income into the future. We've seen firsthand in Gallowinki, the Yonal building houses from their people from the timber trusses and the concrete blocks that were made right here in East Arnhem Land by 100% by Yonal people. And it's great to see them decide, make an absolute decision that our bottom line isn't about money. Our bottom line is about employment and engagement. And that's how people participate, through employment and engagement, not only through profit. We back Gumatj in these projects because we know that every dollar invested by government delivers much more dollar value to Indigenous communities. It's about traditional owners and communities stepping up, speaking up, governments and representative bodies like land councils listening and asking where and how we can assist. Government and land councils are the supporting actors. Traditional owners of communities should be the star of this story. I will be providing $5 million in funding for Gumatj to build additional employment housing in Gunyangara, and it will all be built, and as far as we can, by materials that are made here, and it will all be built by Gumatj employees from this region. So their efforts in training and employment are significant. Now, we recognise the importance of ensuring that organisations like Gumatj have the economic enhancement infrastructure to capitalise on the potential of their land, their ingenuity and their effort combined. We've also worked with land councils to improve processes for the delegation of certain land council functions to subcommittees or sustainable local and regional organisations. I want to see these delegations used to support the aspirations of traditional owners and reduce unnecessary bureaucratic process. I want to work with the land councils to continue to implement what was always intended under the Land Rights Act, and it's about implementing what was intended by Justice Woodward and what leaders like Galarrwuy told him 40 years ago. And he said, "It is important that Aboriginal communities should have as much autonomy as possible in running their own affairs. They should receive the necessary funds to cover administration and other normal, recurrent expenditures. Aboriginal people should be free to follow their own traditional methods of decision-making." It's the implementation of this agenda, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's agenda, that I've committed to making funds available for in the Northern Territory for traditional owners to pursue their own decision-making, whether it be through some community entity township leasing or any of the delegations available under the Land Rights Act or native title. Our government is already supporting Baniella traditional owners, which for those who are not familiar is almost due south of us here, to build their capacity and work towards taking a decision-making power for leasing and land management for their community. I hope the lessons for Baniella that are learnt can be shared with other groups that are interested in going down this path. Traditional owners shouldn't have to jump through the same hoops as mining companies or big business to invest in and utilise their own land assets. Now, I know I share this view with the land councils. I want to work with both the traditional owners and the land councils about how we can better support traditional owner developments to ensure the process for local people to use their own land is as simple as possible. This will certainly assist in waking up land rights. This is how we can find a better place, a proper place for traditional owners in the system that is currently focused around governments and land councils. we must also remember that the struggle for land rights continues for many, despite the bipartisan universal support for recognition of traditional owners of land. Now, I've committed an additional $1 million in funding over the next 4 years to support the work of the Land Commissioner. This money will contribute to the resolution of the remaining land claims in the Northern Territory, and I know that the land councils in the Northern Territory are always working apace for the resolution of the remaining claims. We will also continue to provide $110 million a year over the next 4 years to help finalise all current native title claims within this decade. The vision for land rights is big, it will take work. It also can't be done by one person or one organisation. It requires a genuine partnership between traditional owners, representative bodies and governments. I'll continue to meet with you in your communities on your terms to hear your feedback about how we are all going and to guide our work in this program. One strong example of this is the Redfern statement, released during the campaign, the election campaign. It's a good read, and it's been developed by some great people. I share the aspiration that's outlined in this document. It really speaks to me. I think we must not only connect in dialogue, but also in action. I'll be speaking to the architects of some of the Redfern statement, hopefully this weekend, but we will be meeting and we will be talking. There's not a world of difference necessarily between our aspirations, and we might always agree on how to get there. I think our views align. Like all of you here in the room, certainly leaders of your communities, those making a real difference on the ground, we have common ambitions. There are times when strategies are outlined to address some of these issues. They mightn't be the ones I propose, but that will never stop me from sitting down, consulting, meeting and giving an opportunity to talk to me about how we might change the government's approach of the day. In this spirit, I will be inviting the signatories of the Redfern Statement to what's broadly called a workshop to constructively work through some of these issues we've raised. We will continue along this important journey to constitutional recognition, and the Parliament looks forward to receiving the recommendations of the Referendum Council soon. In closing, let me again acknowledge that we're here on the most important of lands, the country where land rights journey began. Lands that have triggered the most important shifts in how governments work for our First People. More than 50 years on, let this be the start of a new chapter of working together to ensure the people get to use the values of their land in their way. Thank you.